This is Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana University basketball discussion, hosted by Inside the Hall founder and editor, Alex Bozich. Since 2007, Inside the Hall has been trusted by IU fans across the globe to be the one-stop shop for IU basketball news, commentary, and analysis. Join us over at InsideTheHall.com. That's InsideTheHall.com.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Podcast on the Brink. And you know that Big Ten season is well underway when we have today's guest, John Gasaway of ESPN.com, a guy that I've been reading for a long time, really got me into a lot of the advanced statistics that I like to reference in a lot of my writing on Inside the Hall. He's also the author of an upcoming book that will be released March 16th, 2021, Miracles on the Hardwood, the hope and a prayer story of a winning tradition in Catholic college basketball. I want to get into that later in the podcast, John, but welcome back to Podcast on the Brink. It's always great to hear your voice and talk some Big Ten hoops.
Thanks for having me. Always want to come back to the Big Ten with every opportunity I have. I appreciate the time.
So, John, you had a tweet 2 days ago. It was pretty simple. It had a graphic and it had one sentence. The Big Ten is stronger by far than it's ever been in the Ken Pom era. What's leading that? And, you know, what metrics are you looking at? I know you're looking at efficiency margin for the whole conference as a whole, but kind of what at this point, why is the Big Ten as strong as it's ever been in the Ken Pom era?
That's a measure of top to bottom strength, and you can be an aficionado of that while still realizing, we all as fans of whatever conference you're a fan of, you want one or preferably multiple teams to be good enough to win the national championship. That's a completely separate question from how good are all your teams. So in the case of the Big Ten, which statistically this year is the best conference in the country and indeed is one of the stronger conferences we have seen in recent years, there are a lot of not very sexy things driving that number. It does matter how bad your worst team is. So if we agree that this year perhaps it will turn out to be the case that the worst team is Nebraska, if you look at it closely, which nobody ever looks at the worst team closely, nor should they, Nebraska is better than a lot of recent worst Big Ten teams. Rutgers back in the day was far, far worse than Nebraska is going to be this year. So, crazy things that nobody needs to pay attention to are part of what's driving that number. But more importantly, most teams are better than they were last year or the year before. Rutgers being, example 1A, but also teams like Illinois obviously has improved. Many teams have. It looks like Michigan is going to be really good, perhaps, with the notable exceptions of, perhaps Michigan State and Purdue. You're seeing a lot of improvement over these last couple of years happening simultaneously in the Big Ten, and it has an effect. It has an impact on the bottom line, and it's as somebody who grew up, cheering and watching the Big Ten. It's nice. It's fun to see the conference be this strong. I enjoy it.
In terms of the top of the league right now, there's 4 teams in the top 10 of Ken Pom's ratings, which is what I like to look at and use as a guide as the season goes along, because it gives you a baseline with which to start figuring in priors, and then kind of as the season goes along and we get more data in, that drops off and we get a clear glimpse of kind of what's happening this season. But you mentioned the Michigan. Right now, I think for the Big Ten at large, they're the surprise team. They're 9-0, they're 4-0 in conference. They haven't necessarily played the schedule that some of the other teams have played in the Big Ten, particularly in the non-conference, but they look capable of at least maybe getting into that tier with Illinois, Wisconsin, and Iowa. I'm curious, of those 4 teams right now, which one do you like the most in terms of potential to in the Big Ten's national championship route? Now, I say that with the preference of, I think right now Gonzaga is the best team in the country by a pretty large margin. But, I think those of us who have followed the Big Ten for as long as both of you and I have, we can't get the thought of 21 years now without a national championship out of the back of their mind. So it's an annual conversation. When is the Big Ten going to end this drought? And of those teams at the top, which one do you think gives the league the best chance to end that drought this year?
Yeah, keep the faith. Anything can happen. Gonzaga looks unbeatable right now, but so did Kentucky in 2015, and they were vanquished by a Big Ten team. And speaking of that particular Big Ten team, I did pick Wisconsin in the preseason. I do like how they are built for the long haul. I'm not wowed by how the Badgers have started Big Ten play on offense. However, they've been just as good as I expected them to be on defense. I think that they can get it done. But, yeah, Michigan rightly has caught my eye and everybody's eye. The Wolverines are strange in that they are turning the ball over left and right, and it hasn't mattered yet. I'm tempted to say if they can just have a normal turnover rate, they can win the national championship, because they've just been terrible at that aspect, and it hasn't mattered. They've been amazing in terms of both their own shooting and forcing misses, particularly inside the arc. They've been a big surprise, and they're legitimate, even though you're right, they haven't even gotten into the meat of their Big Ten schedule yet. But there's nothing fake about what they're doing so far. Hunter Dickinson has been remarkable in a normal year where there weren't characters like Luka Garza and Trace Jackson Davis, Desumu. We'd be talking about Hunter Dickinson. So there is strength at the top of the Big Ten. Iowa, as always, you can just paint a sign, I don't know, about 5-6 years ago and say, yes, but what about the defense? That is still true. But they're a blast to watch, because that offense is possibly the best in the country. I greatly enjoy watching the Hawkeyes. So there's no lack of strength at the top of the league. And is there one team that can win the national championship and end this drought? I think the Big Ten is going to flood the NCAA tournament zone and see what they can do through the strength of numbers. But they should get some pretty good seeds.
John, I'm not going to let you off the hook on that question without letting you talk about your alma mater, Illinois. I too picked Wisconsin to win the Big Ten in the preseason. I'm leaning more now towards the Illini after watching the teams play so far. I know Illinois has 3 losses, but I struggle to look at this team as not having the most upside of any team in the Big Ten right now. I think when they're clicking on all cylinders, especially with Io's ability to close games late, and I may be a little bit biased on that because of what he did to Indiana a couple weeks ago, scoring, I think, 18 points in the final 10 minutes, which was just an unbelievable performance. But the combination of Ayo and Kofi, combined with the pieces around those guys, has me second-guessing. I picked of Wisconsin to win the league. I think Illinois checks a lot of the boxes that you look for a team that can make a run. So what do you think of Illinois so far? I noticed you didn't really talk about them in that kind of top 4 group. I know they're in there, but you didn't mention them. So what are your thoughts on the Illini so far?
Illinois belongs in that group, and they've been making their shots, and they're playing. It's early, but they're playing at a markedly faster pace than anybody else in the Big Ten, and that's when Brad Underwood is clicking, going back to his one day at Oklahoma State. That's what he prefers to do, and it's working. They're forcing misses inside the arc, which you want to see as far as, can this defense sustain it and be durable over the long haul. Obviously, if there is a question mark, it is, as any good traumatized Illinois fan with memories of the 2005 national title game will say, what happens when your five-man gets into unjust foul trouble? A big part of what we're describing here in terms of forcing misses or making shots inside the arc is it gets back to Kofi Cockburn, and if he sits, then you see a measurable difference. But otherwise, everything is clicking for the Illini. IO is every bit as good as advertised. That was a remarkable turn of fate for the Illini to have both Kofi and Io DeSumo come back. That was not expected, and you're seeing the strength that results. And the only other thing I would add is they don't shoot many threes, so it's a good offense that should stay good. There's nothing fluky. They're not burying opponents with hot shooting that's not going to last. So they should be in this right until the end, and this is certainly the best of times in many a moon for Illinois fans.
Hey, it's Jared. I'm going to jump in here real quick to talk about Home Field Apparel, our friends at homefieldapparel.com. And there are several reasons why you need to go to homefieldapparel.com to upgrade your Indiana University sports wardrobe. Number one, all of their materials are so comfortable. I have the hoodies. I have a crew neck sweatshirt. I just received my LEO t-shirt that they have. And all of the materials are so soft. It feels so good against your body. And what's nice is that they still feel soft even after you wash them. Because a lot of materials, you get them, you wash them, they don't feel as nice. Home Field Apparel stuff really does. So you can count on that. Plus, they have logos there that you're not going to find anywhere else. That's kind of their thing. They have over 90 different schools that they work with now. They go and find these old brand marks and logos and mascots that haven't been used in 40, 50 years, sometimes longer, and they bring them back. And so it's this great way to indulge your love of nostalgia, find these old logos that you haven't seen. And so when you go there, you'll be able to browse. I mean, for Indiana stuff, they have 2 pages worth of gear that you can see, stuff on t-shirts, stuff on crew necks, stuff on sweaters, such comfortable stuff. And it's not just IU. You may have people in your life that went to school somewhere else. Sorry for those folks, but they may have. And you can find so much gear for other schools as well. And even better, you can save when you go there because our promo code BRINK, BRINK, will help you save 20% on your entire order. So go to homefieldapparel.com, use that promo code BRINK, BRINK, and get 20% off your entire order. All right, back to the show.
Indiana is obviously the program that I cover and we talk about most often on this podcast. Things right now, I would say, in terms of the fan base's satisfaction with what's been going on the court, maybe there's a little bit of frustration from the standpoint of Indiana maybe hasn't taken the leap that Illinois has taken, and Ohio State maybe to a lesser extent. But you look at the Ken Pom ratings right now, Indiana's 7-4 overall, but they're 22nd in the country. They're having a fine season. They've played, I think, a pretty ambitious schedule, at least in the non-conference, although they did play 2 kind of throwaway games that may be hurting their net rating right now. I want to get into the net a little bit later, but just in general, what do you think is working right now for IU under Archie Miller, and what do you think is not working under Archie Miller right now at IU?
I think Trace Jackson Davis is working. I'm a huge fan. I might even say envious fan. I caught all of the Maryland game, for instance. I don't profess to be an Indiana expert, but I, as chance would have it, I did watch all of the Maryland game. And I came to that with interest because on paper, Indiana was doing without offensive boards up to that point, and it reminded me of a conversation I had with Miller all the way back in 2015 when Dayton was doing the same thing a year after they'd been very good on the offensive glass. And they were thin that year, and he as much as told me, I can't ask these guys to try for offensive boards with everything else I'm asking them to do on defense. And I was wondering if this, not that Indiana's thin, because they're not, but I was wondering if somehow Miller had issued a similar order this year, because again, on paper, it was killing Indiana in terms of, just not getting enough chances to score. The usual lament for the past little while has been, the turnovers. The turnovers aren't great, but they're not, they're not bad. They're nowhere near as bad as Michigan's. But it was the lack of second chances that was telling. And then, of course, the punchline against Maryland, they were great. I mean, that in some ways made the difference. I mean, they were just getting so many. They were crashing the offensive glass and getting so many second chances. So, in the abstract, Indiana is fine. 22nd at Ken Pom, that's no mistake. When you're effectively they're a little off of what I'm about to say, but effectively scoring as many points as you're allowing in Big Ten play early, with the conference being as strong as it is, that does net out to top 25 nationally. Yeah, 3 of those have been home games, and we'll have to. And you got a tough challenge coming up at Madison. We'll have to see how that goes. But in general, I'm a stay the course believer with Indiana. It's been a tough stretch, wins and losses wise, but statistically things seem to be going in the right direction, and I think Jackson Davis may yet be heard from in terms of Big Ten Player of the Year, which is amazing this year. Whoever wins that is going to be a really special performer.
It's interesting that you bring up the offensive rebounding, because that's something I've been thinking about a lot in terms of this team, and I was surprised at the performance against Maryland, but maybe I shouldn't have been so surprised given that their front line is a little bit depleted and not what it has been in the past. But offensive rebounding, do you think that's something that coaches change their philosophy on year to year? And is it possible that maybe Indiana is emphasizing it a little bit less with the fact because Joey Brunk is out and they don't have as many bodies on the front line? Or do you think so far that maybe it's just kind of been circumstantial that they haven't emphasized it as much? Because I look at this team and the struggles with the 3-point shooting, they've turned it over a little bit too much at times. And I think, what are some other ways that they can generate points that are somewhat simple? And offensive rebounding comes to mind. And that's really, as you mentioned, the way they won that Maryland game. They were very bad offensively the first half, both teams were, but Indiana really was able to pick it up after halftime. And a big part of that was offensive rebounding.
Yeah, there can be different factors behind a low offensive rebounding number. The first thing that I like to do, and people who have been reading along for a while can mouth the words here along with me, but I like to look at your defensive rebounding first and look at the ratio between those two numbers. And of course, anybody listening to this knows Indiana is fine on the defensive glass. They're perfectly normal. So the low offensive and it's still low even after the Maryland game. The low offensive rebounding number stands out historically in terms of the ratio between those two. I don't think that Miller is literally saying don't get offensive rebounds. He certainly didn't say that against Maryland. Some coaches have said that in the past. Some coaches do, and that is their preference. And of course, it's just a matter of what you're doing in relation to what your opponent's doing. The NBA, for one, gets fewer offensive rebounds than college teams tend to. But when you're doing it a lot less than the rest of your league, then it does have the net effect of just placing more stress on every other area of your offense. You have to shoot that much better. You have to take that much better care of the ball. And, if you can pull it off, fine. But I mean, it's easy to trace where these deficits are coming from. And some of this can be scheme. Some of this can be if you're playing 5 out or not. Some of this can be personnel. But that's what I am watching this year with Indiana. This is a normal defensive rebounding team, and they're taking okay care of the ball, a little bit above the Big Ten average. The numerical difference with a bullet so far is low offensive rebounding, and it's something that I will track going forward.
The defense overall for Indiana has been strong. They had obviously a couple of tough performances against Northwestern. I thought for the most part they defended Illinois about as good as they could have. I mean, holding Illinois to 69 points this year, and I think just 1.04 points per possession, that's pretty good in my opinion. And the Penn State game wasn't great defensively, but they're currently right now in Ken Palm 10th nationally defensively. Is that something where you see this group being able to sustain? I don't mean specifically being top 10, but somewhere in that neighborhood. Do we have enough games kind of in the book yet to where we can feel pretty strongly that Indiana is maybe a top 15, top 20 defense by the end of the season?
Yeah, it's from my chair. It's still a little too early to call on the possessions, and I of course like to look at conference play, and on the possessions. Granted, it's early in conference play, of course. On the possessions where Indiana is not forcing a turnover, they're very average so far in terms of how many points they're allowing. What has bailed them out is that opponents are committing a lot of turnovers, and obviously that's great. If that's an ability that you have and you can continue to do that, then that is definitely one way to get the job done. Actually, Indiana right now at this very early stage has easily the highest opponent turnover rate in the Big Ten. So if that falls, then the kind of normal shooting that opponents are recording so far, that can become an issue. But right now we don't know. The defensive rankings at Ken Palm in early January, in a year where the number of games is being reduced by about 20% nationally. That's going to rely a little bit more on Ken's excellent priors that he brings to the model in the preseason than some other numbers. So we do have to continue watching basketball and see where that nets out. But definitely they have the personnel, and they can certainly perform to that standard. We'll see if that comes to pass.
There's been conversations already about the Big Ten's chance to have a historic number of teams make the NCAA tournament this year. I'd say right now, looking at the league, the only team that you say is probably not going to have a chance is Nebraska. Beyond that, everybody is at least maybe going to be in the conversation. Penn State has a losing record right now, and they haven't won a Big Ten game. That can't continue if they want to be in the conversation, but they do have that strong win at Virginia Tech. Northwestern has surprised a lot of people with their 3-2 start in Big Ten play. Realistically, how many teams from the Big Ten do you think do have a chance to at least be on the bubble or make it into the NCAA tournament this year? Is it actually that 13 I referenced, or do you think it's more realistic, 10 or 11 at the end of the day after the dust settles on conference play?
Yeah, I'm a very interested spectator on questions such as this, as the guy who will ramp up Bubble Watch here in a few weeks. And certainly 13 teams start as legitimately in the conversation, and that is a much different thing than saying, okay, John, you'll win $1 million if you get the number right. How many teams do you think are going to get into the tournament? If you ask me that question, then I would at this point say something more along the lines of 10. Teams like Maryland, Penn State, possibly even Northwestern, which has started great, but laptops are still somewhat skeptical of the Wildcats. Teams like this are going to have to continue to get it done, or in the case of Penn State, they're going to have to elevate their performance over what we've seen so far. Maryland, arguably, too. But otherwise, there's a lot of teams that I won't be talking about much in Bubble Watch because they should more or less be safely in. That doesn't mean you'll, of course, see a lot of middling records in the Big Ten because it is a strong conference. So you'll see a lot of teams around 10-10, 11-9, but they should still get really nice seeds. So it will be tough to break the Big East record of the old format Big East, of course, of 11 NCAA bids. But this is a very strong league, and they'll be sending big numbers of teams to the tournament.
The net rankings are now out. They came out Monday. I don't necessarily understand exactly what goes into the net rankings because we've never been given a clear guidance from the NCAA on the formula or what all goes into it. But Indiana, I think, is somewhere around 50 or 51, which I'm not paying a ton of attention to right now, but it does kind of stand out a little bit when you compare it to some of the other computer metrics that I like to look at. What's just your general overall opinion on the net right now as an evaluation tool? What do you like? What don't you like? And do you see this as something that the NCAA is going to continue with for the long term? And do you see changes continuing to be made to it to kind of try to fine-tune it and maybe give us a little bit more transparency as to what exactly goes into it?
Yeah, purely as an end product rating system, I love it because it replaced the RPI, which was the worst single artifact within the sport of college basketball. So I'm a huge fan of it as a rating system. It has no transparency. We don't know what goes into it. We can reverse engineer it and say that it's got a lot of the same things as all good rating systems. There's a strong consensus now in 2021 and has been for years on how to rate college basketball teams. And the only wrinkle with the net is it's a no priors system. It starts from 0 every year. So you get weird things like Colgate being in the top 20 when they first did it because Colgate had only played 2 games. That's fine. Don't look at the net now. Look at it in about 2-3 weeks, and it will be fine. And my only other objection to the net is its existence and its affiliation with Google, which is a very powerful player. And I worry that this will stand in the way of my long-standing let's not have a committee at all bandwagon. I don't think we need a selection committee. I love many sports, and without exception, none of those other sports, professional or otherwise, have selection committees. I don't think we need one in college basketball either. I think it would be much cleaner to use strength of record or wins bubble or some such metric. We would know today, for instance, what the NCAA tournament field would be and what the seeds would be, and it would change every night with results. And I just think it would be like a pennant race, and it would be a great way to live. Maybe we'll get there someday and keep hope alive.
Yeah, I think you make a great point in that right now, guys like you and I who kind of live and breathe the college basketball year round, we're paying attention to everything that happens in the sport. But your casual fan who only tunes in maybe late in the season or they're a casual observer of their school, I think giving a real-time metric of who's in and who's out of the tournament on a given day would actually incentivize following the season more closely during the regular season rather than just a lot of people that drop in late in the season and say, all right, well, I'll watch Selection Sunday, then I'll watch the tournament tip off. I think there would be a pretty big interest if maybe you don't do it right now, but the last 6 or 7 weeks of the season, you say, hey, here's kind of the teams that are in, and then we'll continue to update this every night. And then I think that maybe makes each regular season game mean a little bit more in real time.
Absolutely, and just to pick an example at random, but the drama of a big upset win where the underdog pulls it off, and then after the game, they rush to their laptop and they see, on strength of record, for example, we're in as of now, and the celebration that erupts, that would be fantastic. Instead of going into every game saying, this could be a big, this could have crucial implications, but we don't know, and we just have to sit quietly outside of the committee room while they have their deliberations and then reveal it. Let's just get it out in the open and know the stakes in real time, just like we do in every other sport. I think it would be fantastic. And to end this on a hopeful note, I do think we'll get there. Seen in the big picture of the NCAA, going back to the 3-point line and the shot clock has made far more significant changes than what I and others are proposing here. And I do think we'll get there eventually, and it will be. We'll say, why didn't we do this before? It'll be a great day.
Obviously, still in the midst of a very tough time for the country, the world, really, with the COVID-19 pandemic still going on, and this is obviously an impossible situation for college sports, and that there's obviously a lot of money on the line that has to be considered when they determine whether or not the season continues. But there's been conversations amongst college coaches as to whether that it should be going on right now. I think for the most part it's been successful in terms of percentage of games played. Have you been surprised at all at kind of the numbers of the percentage of games played so far, and particularly in the Big Ten? It looks like only 2 conference games have been postponed to this point. It seems like the Big Ten and the Pac-12, for all of the criticism that they got back in the fall for their handling of football, it seems like in college basketball they've kind of been at the forefront of daily testing and kind of in making it as safe as possible, while also realizing that this is a situation that could change at any time. But have you been at all surprised in general at just the percentage of games that are being completed? And just as someone I know that loves college basketball, what's it been like for you watching games from home this season? Does it feel much different, or once the ball is tipped in the air, can you watch and enjoy the game like you have in the past?
Yeah, 2 surprises to record, I guess. One is how quickly it's become completely normal to watch games that don't have fans at them. If you had told me this at the beginning of last March, that this is what I would be doing, I would think, how odd is that? I've never seen games that matter, at least between good teams, that did not have big crowds right down to the edge of the floor. And it's somehow completely normal. I get into the games just as much as I ever did, and it seems like the players have adjusted as well. So that's been one surprise. The other one has been, as somebody who has long tried to make sense of the sport by tracking every possession in major conference play. The differentials that you rightly mentioned between the experience that, say, the Big Ten is having in terms of how it's been able to play its season, and the Big East, to choose a counterexample, they've been really hit hard, and they're not getting as high a hit rate in terms of games played nearly as the Big Ten. Villanova, again, on pause as we record this. That matters. That's a national championship quality team with the Wildcats. DePaul, of course, has had great struggles. So I don't know if the Big Ten is doing something that other teams and conferences can emulate, or if the Big Ten has just been lucky. But it's whatever the league is doing, it should keep doing it, because almost 25% in already, games already played in the books. So it's been a success story to this point, and the Big Ten office has its fingers crossed that it can keep going.
John, you were on book leave, I believe, for a good chunk of 2020 after the season ended. I'm assuming most of the work's done with your upcoming book, Miracles on the Hardwood, the hope and prayer story of a winning tradition in Catholic college basketball. That's going to be out, it looks like, March 16th, just in time for the NCAA tournament. Could be the year that Gonzaga actually cuts down the net, so that wouldn't be bad timing for the book to come out. But what did you learn from writing this book, and what are some things that fans who want to check this book out can expect to learn from reading it?
Well, first of all, on an Indiana podcast, I want to be clear that although it's a history of Catholic college basketball, I was surprised to find Bob Knight all over this thing. He was a big opposing presence in the careers of a lot of Catholic coaches and on the floors for a lot of Catholic teams. I learned of a scene that I didn't know before. Indiana fans going way back might remember a player named Delray Brooks in the 80s. He held the distinction of, he was one of only two players, high school players, invited by Knight to try out for the 84 Olympic team. The other was Danny Manning. And of course, as Indiana fans know, he transferred. He wanted to go to Notre Dame, but Notre Dame didn't take transfers at that point, so he went to Providence. And young coach Rick Pitino went to the Final Four with Brooks and Billy Donovan. But there's a great scene I uncovered where Pitino was young. I think he was like 33, and he called. He was interested in Brooks, who had already transferred out of Indiana. And he called Knight and said, "What about this Delray Brooks?" And Knight said he can't get over screens. His footwork is terrible. He can't guard. He doesn't jump. And Pitino just ignored him and took him anyway and slotted him in as the number 2 scorer. So I would encourage IU fans to give the book a glance. It's got a lot of Bob Knight and a lot of college basketball history writ large. For one thing, I learned why college basketball is played in halves instead of quarters. I never knew that answer before. So give it a shot. I am done with it, I'm happy to say. It'll come out March 16th, and hope to talk to you more about it once we all have it in front of us, and hope it is as fun to read as it was for me to write.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the start of Bubble Watch on ESPN.com. I always like to check that out. When will that be getting underway? And what other, I know that a lot of the work that you've been doing now on ESPN has kind of been moved to ESPN Plus, which is kind of the paid side of ESPN.com, but that's well worth the subscription. I subscribe to it, actually, not to flatter you, John, just solely to read your work on there, because particularly your Big Ten stuff, I've read it for so long now that I want to keep reading it every year. But when can we expect Bubble Watch to come out, and what other types of coverage are you planning here as we get down the stretch of the college basketball season?
First of all, thank you for your subscription, and there's a lot of other great stuff there as well for anybody listening. Go ahead and pull that trigger. One thing I like is every 30 for 30 ever at the click of a button. That's kind of nice. Bubble Watch is a venerable feature that long predates me. A who's who of ESPN types have carried that ball before me, and the tradition is that it starts up once we've played the Super Bowl and put that in the rear view. I will have to see if that tradition holds true during a pandemic year or whether we started sooner. But Super Bowl at the latest, you'll see Bubble Watch, and this year will be fun because you'll have teams that have played wildly differing numbers of games, and we'll have to evaluate them accordingly. I'm really looking forward to it in 2021.
Thanks, John, as always, for joining us on Podcast on the Brink. I look forward to having you on a couple of times a year. It's always a fun conversation. Like I said, for anybody that's not subscribed to ESPN Plus, there's a lot of different things that come with that. I subscribe mostly to read the John stuff, but there's a ton of great NBA stuff. You mentioned the 30 for 30 stuff. Definitely check that out. And John, again, thanks for your time. We'll maybe try to catch up with you again later in the season once we have a more clear picture of the Big Ten race. But I agree. It's been a lot of fun to have the Big Ten basketball season here. It's great games every night. And we'll look forward to hopefully having a high hit rate on these games continuing, and the rest of the season here is upon us. So we'll be back again, everyone, next week for another episode of Podcast on the Brink. Thanks for listening, and see everybody soon.